The story shortly, but first, after the bilateral engagement, a joint statement has now been released by India and Japan. Both sides have called for a zero-tolerance approach towards terrorism by agreeing to strengthen cooperation against terror groups like Al-Qaeda, the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. India and Japan called on Pakistan's government to book the perpetrators of the Mumbai and Pathankot terror attacks. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his Japanese counterpart have also called for the UN member countries to implement UNSC resolutions dealing with the designation of terrorist entities.
The other big issue which came up was terrorism. And, again, Japan is a country which has always maintained that it has zero tolerance on this issue. And we agreed on rooting out safe havens, on disrupting terrorism networks, financing channels, and halting cross-border movement of terrorists. You will see in the joint statement, the two countries have specifically agreed to cooperate in dealing with threats from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba and other affiliates.
All right, let's now bring in WION's senior editor, Surya Gangadharan, to get perspective on this story. Surya, let me check in with you with regards to this latest statement by India and Japan condemning Pakistan, the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar-e-Taiba. How significant is this move that India and Japan have united to fight the terrorists in Pakistan?
I think it's important enough because the more people India gets, the more countries that support India on this score, the wider is the consensus on the manner in which one has to go about dealing with them. So in that sense, it's a good sign. But I think more than that, frankly, Japan doesn't really have any terror threat in the sense that India faces. And in that sense, perhaps they have no problem in coming on board with India on the score, since they face no terror threat of any kind. Their threat primarily comes from China, which is of a different kind altogether.
Surya, what about, in terms of just recently what happened at BRICS and how the groups, including Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, plus other groups were listed on that declaration, and now this, it really seems like condemning terror and really pointing the finger at Pakistan is now being noticed not just by some of the Asian countries, by other world leaders as well.
No, I think the very fact that it figured in the BRICS declaration, and you have the US also listing many of these terror groups that are in Pakistan on a designated list, does suggest that there is an emerging consensus in favor of taking on these groups. But a lot of these measures are symbolic, they are involved listing them and targeting their sources of funding and all that, which is all very well. But it doesn't solve the problem really for India, that these groups are there in Pakistan, they have sanctuaries there, they are supported by the Pakistani government. So really, when it comes to the crunch, we are still to get some daylight on that.
Surya, what is the bond really between India and Japan as well? I mean, certainly this development has a lot of implications between Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Narendra Modi. What's in it for Japan? Why this bond, why this building of relationship with India?
I think both countries see common cause in taking on China. This is not to say that Japan does not have ties with China. They have billions of dollars in trade, far more than what they have with India. They have a deeper relationship, they interact more frequently, but Japan is also geographically in a situation where it is constantly under Chinese pressure. There are Chinese claims to certain Japanese islands, there are overflights by Japanese Air Force, by Chinese Air Force aircraft, even by Chinese naval vessels that come into Japanese territorial waters. So those pressures are there. Japan needs allies in that part of the world to help it, and in that sense, India comes in as a valuable ally.
Well, we also mentioned this earlier when it comes to Beijing sort of watching this and keeping a close eye on the meet between Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Where is China sort of factoring into all of this? I mean, on one hand, they make it sound like they're okay with this meet, but deep down, is that truly in their own interests?
No, China will always be wary of any alliance that it deems as potentially a threat to its interests. So it objects every time India and the US get together for the Malabar drill. It protested when there was a move to include Australia in the Malabar drill. It is not happy about the emerging relationship between Japan and India, especially the defense component. and it reacted very strongly when the reports emerged that India and Japan are exploring the possibility of cooperation in military areas, in producing military hardware, in exchanging technologies in military hardware. So these are areas where the Chinese are sensitive, and they raise their voice whenever they find that these kind of declarations are being made or there is an intent to pursue along the track.
All right, sir, we'll come to you in just a bit. Let me also bring in defense expert Major General Rad Qadian joining us on this story. Mr. Qadian, thank you so much for joining us. Let me get your perspective on this. India and Japan uniting to combat terror, saying that there is a zero-tolerance approach. All of this coming after Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Narendra Modi meet on day 2 of the visit, saying that it is important to fight terror head-on. Your thoughts on this latest development when it comes to ousting the Pakistani-based terror groups?
As the news is coming out, both the leaders are expected to sign as many as 15 agreements. If you see the geostrategic situation today, both have a convergence of interests insofar as the Chinese designed to expand itself is concerned. Both have been affected by it. We just had a face-off 2.5 months with China on the territorial dispute in the Doklam Plateau. Although it wasn't our territory, but then we were interested in maintaining status quo so that our security interests are not sacrificed. Japan has been victim of it in the East China Sea, where Chinese have forcibly taken control of the Senkaku Islands, where it belonged to Japan. So that is a commonality of interest to stop and to checkmate China from illegally expanding itself. Other countries are too small. Japan is a very strong economy.
Right.
The other interests are, basically, Japan's interest is in stopping North Korea from carrying out this missile trial. India has joined Japan in asking North Korea to discontinue these tests and to dismantle the infrastructure, because Japan is directly threatened with it. And India is a victim of terrorism, so Japan has supported India. In fact, if the recent Doklam Plateau face-off is seen, Japan was one country which was steadfast in supporting India's stand. So the two countries are coming together. Japan is not still exporting any defense equipment, but we can benefit from their investment, from their cooperation, from getting dual-use technology, from getting nuclear energy for our power generation, and the various other fields. We have also interest in acquiring amphibious aircraft, which is actually American. We've been talking about it for some years with Japan. And certain other dual-use technology which can be used. I mean, we can get radars from them which are dual-use. We can get communication equipment from them which we can. And, of course, investment is a big thing. They are investing even in this bullet train project which both leaders have already inaugurated in Gandhinagar. Yes.
Mr. Qadian, let me also ask you, certainly with the bilateral talks, defense and the nuclear ambitions that North Korea is expanding upon day by day is certainly an important element that Japan is trying to build partnerships with other world leaders. And we understand that India also looking to purchase some planes from Japan. How important is it for Japan to have those strategic partnerships as North Korea continues testing its nuclear arsenal?
Yeah, on the subject of North Korea, Japan is directly affected. In fact, they have already tested a missile which overflew Japanese northern Japan territory and which poses a danger. So Japan is directly affected and is interested in North Korea halting these tests. America has been telling them, the rest of the world also has been telling them, but India has unequivocally called on North Korea to discontinue further carrying out these tests, because India may not be directly affected as of today, but Japan is. So the two countries, apart from convergence of common interests like expansion of China is concerned, by which both are affected, these are issues like terrorism affects mainly India, North Korea affects basically Japan out of the two countries. So both have joined hands together to take a common stand on these issues. That is the point I was making.
Right.
Japan is a strong economy. They are, as of today, they are the largest source of FDI in India. So If they invest more, which is in our interest, we have a Make in India project. Japan can join that, and we can make further progress on producing defense equipment in India with Japanese help.
All right.
Japanese investment, financial help. Yeah.
All right, we'll have you stand by there, Mr. Qadian. Let me also bring in defense expert Brigadier Mahalingam joining us now on this story. Let me get your perspective, sir, on this, Mr. Mahalingam. Certainly, the economic cooperations, the trade partnership between India and Japan on the agenda. But, of course, as we talked about North Korea and its nuclear ambitions, certainly paying a huge importance in these talks between Shinzo Abe and Narendra Modi. How critical, how crucial is it for Japan to really build out its allies and its partners when it comes to dealing with the growing nuclear arsenal of North Korea?
See, the problem of North Korea is haunting Japan and the South, and in fact the entire Southeast Asian countries. Now, unfortunately, the United States has not been able to correctly assess the requirement, and by its rhetoric, it is delaying the issues one after the other. Having said that, as far as Japan is concerned, Japan requires India's support in the East China Sea as well as in the area of South China Sea for its security vis-a-vis China and North Korea. And naturally, because India has a problem with China in its northern borders,
right.
Naturally, India and China are really relatively very friendly, and that is one issue that we have to take into account. And second issue that I wish to bring out is as far as the issue of terrorism which Japan has brought out and the punishing the perpetrators of 26/11 and the Pathankot attack are concerned. These are the normal reaction of any country would be. But unfortunately, the Pakistan doesn't see the light of the day, because it now has gone on to say that it is going to recalibrate its foreign policy issue overall. The point is that why can't Pakistan do away with the terror camps, the protection that they are providing to the terrorists, and tackle the terrorists? These are very basic issues that not only India, United States, but also at the BRICS meeting the Chinese asked for. That is not taking place. Therefore, I think it is a good thing that the China has come closer to India. And also I expect the other Southeast Asian countries and also Australia and New Zealand to come closer to form an alliance so that there is some sort of a balance maintained between the Chinese and the rest of the world who are being continuously being harassed and intimidated.
All right, Mr. Mahalingam, let me also ask you another thing that came up on the talks between Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, of course, about terror. A joint statement condemning Pakistan and terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, both sides agreeing for a zero-tolerance approach. This also echoes similar sentiments to what happened at BRICS not too long ago, where even Beijing was sort of forced to put pressure on that. How surprised are you about this? I mean, was this a surprise move? Was this expected? I mean, the economic cooperation and the nuclear defense talks were on the agenda, but when it comes to terror, how surprised are you that this came up in this meeting?
You see, in the world of politics, when you talk about economics doesn't come all by itself. It is the issues of other geopolitical issues and other issues concerning the countries definitely come into play. And in this particular case, as I have been explaining, the Japanese have been absolutely been concerned about by the way the North Koreans and the Chinese are dealing with them. And therefore, this issue has been rightly brought up by Japan so that it garners the support of India. As you are aware, even in the Doklam issue, it was just Japan which came out and openly supported India. And in this particular case, Japan coming and supporting India. In the case of Masood Azhar and the LET, I am not surprised at all. It was a very natural sort of an outcome of the trouble both Japan and India are facing in geopolitics.
Mr. Mahalingam, speaking of that, when it comes to, those situations, where does China factor in all of this? I mean, Beijing has been certainly watching the developments taking place in Gujarat between India and Japan. How concerned are China, or at least how are they projecting this meet between these two leaders?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. I was going to say, where does China factor into all of this between India and Japan's meet? It seems on one hand that Beijing is okay, or they're saying they're comfortable with this, but are they really comfortable with India and Japan building its strength and its allies?
Beijing may not be concerned. We must understand Beijing is a near superpower today. As far as Beijing is concerned, it is quite capable of handling either India or Japan individually. So Beijing may not be concerned about India and Japan getting together. But the point is that India and Japan getting together, as also the other countries of the region joining together, is primarily to safeguard their own interests. That is precisely what is happening, and Beijing has no reason whatsoever to ever fear either India or Japan in as far as the military strength or their capability to tackle any of those issues.
All right, let me bring in Surya Gangadharan back into the conversation. Surya, in terms of this meet, there was a lot that was accomplished between the two leaders, between Japan and India. Of course, India reciprocating what Japan did last year for Prime Minister Modi. I mean, these ties continue to strengthen. And how important is that for India to continue building and foraying its relationship with other leaders in Asia, given that its tense relationship with its immediate neighbors of Pakistan and China?
Archit, I think what is more pertinent here is the joint statement, which has some interesting points made there. One, the expansion in the scale and complexity of the Malabar exercise, that's important from both countries' point of view. Technical discussions on collaboration in areas like unmanned ground vehicles and robotics, that's the first. And also Japan's readiness to provide state-of-art defense equipment such as the US-2 amphibian aircraft, although that has been under discussion for many years. Also the preference for giving India dual-use technologies. There's also a cyber dialogue going on between India and Japan, again that's important. And as with reference to the South China Sea, both Prime Ministers have underscored the importance of ensuring connectivity infrastructure in terms of, South China Sea being free for navigation by all parties. Also interesting, there's a reference here to CPEC, although that is not mentioned by name. There's a reference to connectivity infrastructure in an open, transparent and non-inclusive manner based on international standards and responsible debt financing practices. As you're aware, one of the points we made about the Belt and Road Initiative of China is that it is neither transparent nor is it self-sustainable. So there we are. I think the joint statement tells you a lot about where India and Japan are going.
Surya, let me also ask you really quickly with regards to that. Is a lot of this, the joint statement, you mentioned quite a bit of the point that was raised, but to a certain extent, was this joint statement to perhaps ward off China? Sort of the elephant in the room? I mean, where do they factor in, or was that sort of a hidden message for Beijing?
No, there's no question of either country warding off China. You have to deal with China, you have to engage with them. We engaged with them on Doklam. There was a standoff, yes, but we also diplomatically engaged and the standoff ended. So that's what Japan is also doing, and it's important to understand that Japan does billions of dollars in trade with China. They have a lot of interaction at every level. So despite differences, territorial differences on the islands in the South China Sea, they engage and they deal with each other. So India is doing the same. Even so, for India and Japan to get together to talk about China is important. We can share ideas and perhaps even carry out some joint exercises in the South China Sea. These are important to keep the Chinese, to tell the Chinese and send them a signal that we are not alone, we are together, we are allies in a sense, and we understand the importance of ties with China, but we also know where, how far China can go and where to draw the line.
All right, let me also bring in Mr. Raj Kadian joining us as well. Another agreement that was in fact signed was one about the India-Japan Act to look east to enhance some of the connectivity and promote development projects in that area, especially in the northeastern region of India, certainly sort of using the technology like the bullet train that Japan has, certainly a step in the right direction. What do you think about that, Mr. Kadian?
Sorry, you'll have to repeat the question a little slowly.
Sure. Yeah, the question about the one of the other agreements was the India-Japan Act East policy. This was in pertaining to the promotion of developmental projects in the northeastern region of India to ensure effective and efficiency, promote connectivity as well. How crucial is that for India to gain perhaps what Japan has known for its technology, things like the bullet train, and really consolidate those ties?
Yeah, if you are talking about development of the northeast region of India, Japanese certainly can help. As I said earlier also, basically it is their economy that can help us. Japan is a very strong economy. Their investments and our technology and our efforts both can develop the northeast region, if that is the question that you are asking.
Right.
China, of course, both countries, for any two countries to come together, there has to be commonality of interest. And today that interest lies in having adversarial relations with China. Both countries are suffering from that. We have already cooperated with them for a number of times, joint naval exercise in Malabar. We had one recently in May where U.S. also took part. So China, China has to be halted from its illegal expansion into the region. Then the countries in the region, no single country may be able to stand. India is the strongest country, but it has to take other countries along, which includes not only Japan, but other peripheral countries of the littoral states of the South China Sea. Japan is more affected in the East China Sea, but they are equally interested that China's expansion must be checkmated. And that is where both countries coming together will help. Northeastern region is part of that China, the Japanese economic interest in India, their investments which can help us in developing all regions. We are also developing a cooperation and convention center in Varanasi. And of course the bullet train, we made a start. Ultimately the four metro cities will also hopefully be connected by bullet trains in passage of time. So Japanese can help in all these respects, except that they have a self-imposed ban on export of military or production of military equipment as of today after the Second World War. But that may also change in due course of time in case China continues to threaten them or in case they strategically feel that they need to be militarily stronger.
All right.
As of now, both countries have a common interest and they must move together forward.
All right. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Surya Gangadharan, Brigadier Mahalingam, sir, and Mr. Raj Kadian on the India-Japan consolidation. About 15 agreements signed a short while during that bilateral meet.